Nobody on that street corner saw it coming. Not the boy who thought he was in control of the moment, and certainly not the man he had chosen to humiliate, because that man was about to do something with $50 that would change everything, including the boy who gave it. The bench outside the Kroger on Broad Street in Chattanooga, Tennessee, had been Raymond Elias Pruitt's most reliable address for the better part of 3 months. It was not a bench he had chosen so much as one he had arrived at gradually, the way a person arrives at the lowest point of a long decline, not in a single dramatic fall but through a slow accumulation of losses that each seemed survivable on their own and only revealed their full weight when added together. Raymond was 63 years old, though he looked closer to 75, with a white beard that had grown past the point of intention and a pair of work boots held together at the left sole with a strip of electrical tape he had found in an alley behind the pawn shop on Market Street. He had worked construction for 26 years in this city, had owned a small house on the east side of town, had been married to a woman named Gloria who made sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving and who had died of a stroke 4 years ago in the kitchen of that house while Raymond was at the hardware store buying weather stripping for the back door, which was the kind of specific and unbearable detail that lodged itself permanently in the mind and could not be reasoned away no matter how. Many years passed. After Gloria died, the house followed. Then the work, because grief at 60 is different from grief at 40, and Raymond had not known how to carry it and keep a level line at the same time. He was not a man who asked for things easily. He sat on the bench outside the Kroger on Broad Street and he held a cardboard sign that said, "Veteran. Hungry. God bless you," and he accepted what people offered without commentary and thanked them genuinely for every dollar and did not explain himself to anyone, because dignity, he had decided, was one of the last things he still owned outright and he was not going to surrender it to anyone's pity. On a Saturday morning in late March, Raymond Pruitt had not eaten in 3 days. This was not a figure of speech or an exaggeration deployed for sympathy, it was a plain and specific fact. He had eaten a granola bar on Wednesday afternoon, given to him by a woman walking a golden retriever who had stopped to read his sign, and before that a half-eaten sandwich he had found in a bag someone had left on top of a trash can on Georgia Avenue. His stomach had moved past the loud, demanding phase of hunger and into the quieter, more dangerous phase, the one that feels less like urgency and more like a slow draining, like the feeling of being unplugged from something essential. He sat on the bench in the pale March sunlight with his hands folded in his lap and watched the Saturday morning foot traffic on Broad Street, families going into the Kroger, couples from the condos up the hill with reusable bags and earbuds, a group of teenagers moving in that loose, unhurried cluster that teenagers move in when Saturday belongs entirely to them and they know it. He was watching the street without expectation, the way a man watches something when he has learned not to need it to be anything in particular, when a boy broke away from the group and dropped onto the far end of his bench with the sprawling, theatrical ease of someone performing casualness for an audience he cared about impressing, and pulled a fast food bag from under his arm and produced a burger wrapped in yellow paper with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been looking forward to a thing. His name was Brandon Kyle Mercer. He was 16 years old and it was his birthday, the fact of which he had mentioned to his friends approximately 7 times since they had left his house on Missionary Ridge Road an hour ago, because 16 felt like it meant something, like a threshold he had been waiting at for a while and had finally been permitted to cross. He was the kind of boy who was not unkind by nature but who had grown up in circumstances comfortable enough that the discomfort of others had remained largely theoretical to him, a thing that existed in the world in the abstract but that had never sat close enough to make him feel its actual texture. He had a new phone, good sneakers, and a group of friends who laughed at his jokes, and he was 16 years old on a Saturday in March and the day felt like his in a way that made him expansive and slightly reckless in the way that the feeling of ownership over a moment sometimes makes people. He unwrapped the burger and was halfway through his first bite when he noticed the old man at the other end of the bench looking at the food with the involuntary, unstudied attention that the body produces when it has been a long time without something it needs. Brandon noticed this the way you notice something you were not looking for, and his first instinct, the one that came before thought, was a small, genuine flicker of something. But the friends were watching from 10 feet away, and the day was his, and the flicker was overridden by a different instinct, the social one, the one that reads the audience and performs for it. He looked at the old man and said, with a smirk that was more performance than malice, whether he was hungry. Raymond looked at him steadily and said, without self-pity and without asking for anything, that he had not eaten in 3 days. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, because the truth did not need decoration. Brandon laughed. It was not the laugh of a genuinely cruel person, it was the laugh of a 16-year-old boy who had chosen the wrong audience to perform for and was now committed to the bit, the kind of laugh that is more about the people watching than the person it is directed at, which does not make it less harmful, only differently sourced. He held up the burger, and then, with the deliberate theatrical slowness of someone making sure the gesture landed, he turned and dropped it directly into the trash can 3 feet away. He looked back at Raymond and said that if the old man dug it out and ate it, he would give him $50 cash right now. His friends made sounds of disbelief and amusement. Brandon pulled out his phone. Raymond Elias Pruitt looked at the trash can for a long moment. He was 63 years old and he had poured concrete and framed walls and roofed houses in this city for 26 years. He had a wife named Gloria who had made sweet potato pie. He had a patch of electrical tape holding his left boot together and 3 days of nothing in him. He stood up from the bench and he walked to the trash can and he reached in and he took the burger out and he unwrapped the yellow paper and he ate it standing there on the sidewalk outside the Kroger on Broad Street, with Brandon's phone pointed at him and his friends watching, and his hands were not entirely steady but his eyes were, and he finished every bite because he was a man who had made a decision and he was going to carry it through without flinching. When he was done, Brandon dropped 2 folded 20s and a 10 on the ground at his feet, the way you set something down when you want it to be clear that you are setting it down rather than giving it. Raymond bent and picked up the money. He folded it once. He put it in the pocket of his jacket. He walked into the Kroger without looking back. Inside the store, Raymond moved down the grocery aisle slowly, not yet sure what he was going to do with $50, holding it in his pocket with the particular awareness of a man who has been without money for long enough that having it feels provisional and slightly unreal. He was standing in the cereal aisle when he heard a woman's voice at the checkout lane at the end of the row, low and strained in the specific register of someone trying to hold something together in public that is threatening not to hold. He moved toward the sound the way he moved toward most things, without rushing, but without looking away. The woman was named Paulette and Mercer. She was 44 years old and she had driven across town to this particular Kroger on Broad Street because it was the only location that carried the specific building set that her son had asked for his birthday, the same son who was currently outside on the bench performing for his friends. And she had gotten to the checkout and discovered that her card was reading an amount $40 less than what she had expected because an automatic bill had pulled from her account that morning. That she had forgotten was scheduled. She was $38 short. She was explaining this quietly to the cashier, a young woman with an expression caught between sympathy and the institutional inability to do anything about it, and her voice was carrying the thin, careful quality of a woman who was not going to cry in a grocery store but was working harder than it should take to maintain that position. Raymond stood at the edge of the checkout lane and listened. He did not think about it for very long. He had learned in 63 years that the moments when you know what the right thing is are the moments to move before the thinking catches up and talks you out of it. He stepped forward and he placed the folded $50 on the counter beside Paulette Mercer's items and he said, quietly and without ceremony, that she should use this, and before she could turn fully around to respond, he was already walking toward the door. Paulette caught up with him in the parking lot. She had the bag in one hand and she was saying, with genuine urgency, that she could not accept this, that she did not know him, that it was too much. Raymond stopped walking and turned to look at her and said that it was all right, that he had come by it today and that she should use it for her son's birthday and that was all there was to it. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already made a peace with a decision and are not looking to reopen it. Paulette looked at him for a moment, at the white beard, the taped boot, the jacket that had seen many seasons, and her expression shifted from protest into something else entirely, something quieter and harder to name, and she thanked him in the way you thank someone when the ordinary word is not quite reaching the actual thing you are trying to say. She was still standing outside the entrance when Brandon and his friends came around from the side of the building, Brandon with his phone out and the satisfied energy of a boy who believes the afternoon belongs to him. He saw his mother first. Then he saw the old man beside her. His pace slowed. Brandon grabbed Raymond's sleeve with the rough, reflexive entitlement of someone accustomed to objects returning to his possession, and said that the $50 was his money and he wanted it back. Raymond looked at him and said, without anger and without apology, that he didn't have it anymore. Brandon looked at his mother. Paulette and Mercer looked at her son with an expression that Brandon would remember for the rest of his life, not rage, which would have been easier, but something worse, a deep, clear, fully arrived disappointment, the kind that only a parent can produce because it carries within it the specific weight of everything they had hoped for you and everything they had tried to build in you and the distance between those two things and where you currently stood. She told him, standing on the sidewalk outside the Kroger on Broad Street in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that she had seen the trash can. She said she had been pulling into the parking lot when it happened and she had sat in her car for a moment before coming in because she needed to be sure she was thinking clearly before she responded. She told him that the $50 he had used to humiliate a man who hadn't eaten in 3 days had, in a chain of events he had not intended and could not have predicted, made it possible for her to buy the birthday gift he had asked for, and that as a result, everything she had brought for his birthday today, the building set, the money she had set aside for dinner at his favorite restaurant on Fraser Avenue, the new headphones she had ordered and picked up Thursday, was going instead to Raymond Elias Pruitt, every bit of it, right now, and that Brandon would help her carry it to him. Brandon opened his mouth. Paulette looked at him once more with that same expression and he closed it. They gave Raymond the bags. He tried to refuse and Paulette said, with a finality that was not unkind but was absolute, that it was already decided. She put her hand briefly on Raymond's arm and she told him to take good care of himself. Then she took her son by the shoulder, not roughly but with direction, and she walked him to the car, and Brandon Mercer sat in the passenger seat on the drive home on a street that was still technically his birthday and looked out the window at Chattanooga going past and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would have made any difference, and because the silence was already doing the work that words could not. The people who have the least are often the ones who give the most freely, because they understand better than anyone what it costs to go without, and what it means when someone reaches into the little they have and hands it to a stranger anyway. Cruelty does not stay contained to the moment it is born in. It moves through the world and finds its way back, not always as punishment, but always as truth. And the greatest gift you can give a person you love, especially a young person still learning who they are, is not what they ask for. It is the clear-eyed, unsentimental reflection of who they are becoming, held up with love but without compromise. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that how we treat the most vulnerable people among us says everything about the kind of person we actually are, and that the most important lessons rarely arrive wrapped the way we expected.